And so, after 2 years of blabbering and stalling, we're finally here, I-95 at last. I knew I'd have to cover this one eventually. I mean, I run a series blatantly titled Interstates. It'd be a death sentence if I didn't cover I-95. I-95 has the notoriety of being quite possibly the most important route in the country. It connects the entire eastern coast of the United States from Miami to Washington to NYC and all the rest of the Atlantic cities. It's a route that's undoubtedly held near and dear to most, serving over 100 million people, so I guess that just puts extra pressure on me to do this episode right and not piss anyone off. An interstate following the East Coast has existed as an idea since the initial plans of the system itself, so I guess I-95's existence was guaranteed from the start. Some of 95 throughout New England was already built and ready to go, since it could be adopted from existing turnpikes. Surprisingly, 95 wasn't actually complete until 6 years ago. Much like I-70, a gap in the route in New Jersey meant that traffic would be rerouted onto Interstate 295. This gap was due to the cancellation of the Somerset Freeway, which was meant to carry the route of 95 through some of New Jersey. Recently, however, the gap was closed through a new set of ramps connecting 295 and 276, and the route was completed from Florida to Maine. Now, if only PennDOT could do the same in Breezewood. Very recently, on June 11, 2023, a truck caught fire and exploded while trying to exit I-95 outside of Philadelphia, damaging the southbound lanes and causing a total collapse of the northbound lanes. A temporary roadway was constructed, capable of carrying 6 lanes of traffic in total, and was open a mere 2 weeks after the collapse. After a few months of additional work, the original lanes reopened in November 2023. No extension plans currently, or probably ever will, exist for I-95 as the route is complete from Florida to Maine, and room for extension is basically non-existent. That being said, plans do exist in several areas to expand the highway and relieve congestion, much the same way as MoDOT is doing with I-70 right now.
Because we all know that adding lanes is a perfect solution to traffic that has no consequences whatsoever, right?
With all of that said, let's start our 1,900-mile-long journey up the east coast of the United States on the mother road of the interstate system, Interstate 95. I-95 begins somewhat humbly, simply exiting off of US 1 onto its own road in downtown Miami. Immediately after this, it kind of exits with the Rickenbacker Causeway and then turns north to exit with the southern terminus of US 41 and Florida 968. Following this is Florida Route 836 and Interstate 395, a spur for Miami Beach. We also meet exits for Florida routes 944, 934, 932, and 916.
I'm thinking of creating a new state route, but what should I number it? I got it!
In Golden Glades, we meet a very convoluted interchange with Florida 826, US Route 441, and the Florida Turnpike. After this, we meet exits for Florida 860, 205th Street, Florida 858, Florida 824, and Florida 820. We meet a few more state routes before meeting our next big interchange, this time with Interstate 595 and Florida State Route 84. In Fort Lauderdale, we meet exits with State Route 736, 842, 838, 816, and 870. We also meet Florida State Route 814 in Pompano Beach, alongside State Routes 834, 869, and 810. All these numbers, my brain's starting to hurt. We're not even that far along yet. In downtown Boca Raton, we meet State Routes 808 and 794. Following this is an exit with State Route 806 in Delray Beach. We also meet Route 804 in Boynton Beach and Route 812 in Lantana, as well as 802 in Lake Worth Beach. Now arriving in West Palm Beach, we meet State Route 882, followed by US Route 98, as well as the Palm Beach International Airport. We also meet State Route 704 right next to Clear Lake, and State Route 708, which takes you to Palm Beach proper. Now we meet State Route 786 in Palm Beach Gardens, where we also begin to parallel, but do not become concurrent with, the Florida Turnpike, which if you remember in this sea of state routes, we met all the way back in Miami. Finally, we meet State Route 706 and, for the first time so far on I-95, meet some land that isn't absolutely covered in residential and commercial area. Or, in simpler terms, we finally get to see some trees.
Hell yeah! Dendrology.
Next up is Florida 76 outside of Palm City, and then we actually exit with the Florida Turnpike, which we've been paralleling for a good couple of miles now. We, however, break the parallel to circumvent Palm City, meeting a rest stop in State Route 714 in the process. We also meet exits for Port St. Lucie and River Park. A few miles later, we cross back over, but don't exit with, the Florida Turnpike before meeting an interchange with Florida Route 70, followed by an interchange with State Route 68. We also meet another rest area. Now, we actually meet some farmland, which, if you haven't guessed, isn't very common along I-95 in Florida. Next, we meet exits for Lakewood Park, Vero Beach, and Sebastian. Then, seemingly in the middle of nothing, we meet an exit for St. John's Heritage Parkway. We'll find, however, that this ends up connecting us back to the city of Melbourne, where we also meet State Routes 507, 514, and 500, as well as US Route 192. We also meet State Routes 518 and 404 on the north side of the city. You know, this may be kind of off topic, but as somebody who lives in the state of Missouri, a place where the word tropical is but a distant idea, seeing houses arranged like this, jammed so close together and in such a robotic and monotonous fashion, it really fascinates me. It just seems so perfect yet so boring at the same time. It's quite interesting. Anyways, back to the road.
Yeah, I didn't come here for depression, I came here for roads, damn it.
95 meets an exit for State Route 519 next, which is followed by exits for routes 520 and 524, as well as a cloverleaf with 528, a route that connects us back to Orlando. But we've got to continue straight on 95, where we meet what looks to be a future cloverleaf with the Port St. John's Parkway. We then meet an interchange with Florida 407, which is followed by an exit with State Route 50, the primary road used to access Titusville. We also have an exit for 406, which also connects back to Titusville. Following this, we meet exits with Deering Parkway, Edgewater, and New Smyrna Beach. Outside of the nearby Port Orange, we meet an exit with State Route 421, which is followed by an interchange where we meet State Route 400 and the western terminus of our old friend, Interstate 4. This is followed immediately by an exit with US 92 for Daytona Beach, where we also meet LPGA Boulevard and Florida State Route 40. North of Ormond Beach, we meet US Route 1 for the first time since Miami. I'm honestly surprised it took us this long. And US 1 switches from the east to the west side of 95. We then meet exits for Flagler Beach, Palm Coast, and US 1, which switches back to our other side. We also meet another rest area and an exit for Florida 206, which is followed, funnily enough, by Florida 207. After this, we meet Florida 16, which connects us back to St. Augustine. We also meet the International Golf Parkway, an interesting name for a road. And then we have an exit in the small village of... Wait a second! After this, 95 meets another rest area, followed by Route 9B.
What is this? We're putting letters on our highways now?
Next is an interchange with Interstate 295 on the south side of Jacksonville, which is followed by our fourth meeting with US Route 1, which switches back to our west side.
Pick a side already!
Next, we meet an exit with State Route 152, which is followed by an exit with Florida 202, which is something of a freeway on the south part of Jacksonville. We meet some smaller exits before exiting with US 90 and Florida 13 and crossing the St. Johns River into downtown Jacksonville. Immediately following our entrance into downtown, we meet the western end of another interstate giant, that being I-10, and what appears to be an incredibly convoluted and confusing interchange. Next, we meet an exit for US 23, which is succeeded by an almost cloverleaf with Alt US 1. We meet some more smaller exits and then cross the Trout River, where afterwards we meet an interchange with Florida 105. In another case of sequential superposition, we next meet an exit for Florida 104, which is followed a few miles later by our second meeting of 295, signaling our exit of Jacksonville. Although maybe I shouldn't be jumping to that conclusion so swiftly, as our next two exits connect us back to the international airport. After a few miles of nothingness, we meet our last of many, many state routes.
Finally, thank God.
This time being State Route 200. After this, we meet an exit with US Route 17 before we cross the St. Mary's River into our second state, Georgia. Although at first glance it may not appear that 95 stays in Georgia for too long, don't be fooled, as although we aren't in Georgia for nearly as long as we were in Florida, we are still in Georgia for well over 100 miles. First, we meet an interestingly shaped interchange with St. Mary's Road, which is followed by an exit with Georgia State Route 40 outside of Kingsland. Kingsland also has two more exits on its north side, though neither are really effective connections to the city. Now we've really hit an empty section of 95, as we only have 4 exits over the next 20 miles, none of which take you anywhere populated. Finally, however, we meet an exit with US Route 17, which will take you into Brunswick. However, 95 does not directly enter Brunswick, instead opting to cross the South Brunswick and Turtle Rivers before meeting exits with US 341 and State 25 on the north side of the city. Next, we meet State 99 before crossing the Altamaha River, as well as the Butler River right next to it. Following this are exits with the small towns of Darien, Eulonia, South Newport, and Midway. Past this, we cross several unnamed waterways before meeting US 17 and State Route 144 outside of Richmond Hill. After that, we meet State Route 204 on the far outskirts of Savannah, which is succeeded a few miles later by an interchange with Interstate 16.
Hey, I recognize you.
Next, we meet US Route 80 outside of Pooler, as well as the Pooler Parkway, which is really fun to say, and State Route 17. Finally, we meet State Route 21 on the north side of Savannah before crossing the Savannah River into our third state, that being South Carolina. I-95 doesn't really do much for its first 2 miles in South Carolina, only meeting at truck parking at first. This changes quickly, however, when we meet US Route 17 on the south side of Hardeeville. We also meet US Route 278 on the north side of Hardeeville. However, this is followed by several miles of nothingness, only broken by a rest stop outside of the small village of Switzerland?
Alright, which one of you thought that was funny?
Which is followed by an exit with US Route 17, who's been paralleling 95 for quite some time now. Next is an exit for Ridgeland, where US 17 actually becomes concurrent with I-95 on the north side of the city. Following this is more nothingness, which is broken only by an exit for the village of Kusawachi. Interesting name. A few miles later, we lose our concurrency with US 17.
Dang it!
And 95 turns north to meet State Route 68 in Yamasi. After all that, 95 meets an exit with US 21, though there are not really any cities nearby. A few miles later, we meet the Hendersonville rest area, which is followed down the road by an exit for State Route 63, which takes you to Walterboro.
We need to cook.
Also outside of Walterboro is an exit with State Route 62. After that, 95 meets exits for the small towns of Canadas, St. George, where we meet US 78, US 178 with no nearby city, and Interstate 26, which takes you to Charleston or Columbia, depending on your direction. Next, we meet US 176 outside of Providence, which is followed by an exit with US 15 and US 301, which we gain concurrency with, south of Santee. After crossing Lake Marion, we lose concurrency with US 301 and continue northeast towards, well, not really much of anything.
I hope you used the restroom earlier.
Eventually, though, we meet exits for Somerton, US 301 again, and Manning, followed by US 521 outside of Alcaloo. We also meet State Route 527 outside of Sardinia and US 378 outside of Turbeville. Past Turbeville, we don't really meet much of anything for a while. We do meet some smaller state routes that don't lead anywhere, but we don't see anything noteworthy until US Route 76 outside of Florence. After 76 is, surprisingly, the end of another major interstate, this time being Interstate 20. We also meet US 52 and State Route 327. Finally, we meet State Routes 38, 34, and 57 before exiting with US 501 right on the border and south of the border. Might just be the most confusing sentence I've ever said on this channel. We enter our fourth state with the same exit as the last, given that the two states actually share the exit. This is immediately followed by North Carolina State Route 130, which takes us to the nearby town of Rowland. After this, we gain concurrency with US 301 again. Next, we meet an interstate I haven't talked about in a long time, this time being incomplete Interstate 74 outside of Lumberton. Also outside of Lumberton, we meet NC 72 and 211. Not to mention, we lose concurrency with US 301 again, although, interestingly, we exit with US 301 again about a mile later.
Just make up your damn mind already.
Next up, we meet State Route 20 in the town of St. Paul's, US 301 in nowhere, and what Google Maps labels as Garrison Drive, but is actually the under construction segment of I-295 around Fayetteville. After this, Business 95 spurs off into Fayetteville, and we turn westward to encircle the city. This involves meeting exits with State Route 59, Claude Lee Road, a cloverleaf with State 87, State 53, State Route 24, and the other side of Business 95, and finally the northern end of Interstate 295, which also happens to include US 13. Next, we parallel US 301 through the towns of Wade and Godwin before meeting US 421 outside the city of Dunn. After that is Benson, a small town that has two exits, a simple diamond with NC 50, and an interchange with I-40. 40 either takes you to Wilmington or Raleigh, depending on which direction you go, though I imagine most probably use this to access Raleigh, given that it would have been faster to exit a long time ago if you were heading to Wilmington. Following the I-40 interchange are exits for Four Oaks, US 701, Smithfield, and US 70, which will be converted to Interstate 42 in the future. Going forward, we meet exits in the small towns of Selma, Micro, Bagley, and Kinley, where we meet US 301 again. Next up, we meet NC 42, which is subject to a potential renumbering, followed by US 264 and Interstate 587, which interestingly doesn't appear to connect directly back to I-87. I'm sure it will eventually, though, when 87 gets completed from Raleigh to Norfolk, Virginia. Oh yes, I almost forgot to mention, Interstate 795 also splits off in the same interchange, which will take you to Goldsboro. But anyways, getting back on track to 95, the interstate has an exit in Wilson, followed by a couple of smaller exits before meeting future I-87, current US 64, at a cloverleaf outside of Rocky Mount, which is an interesting name for a town on the side of the country completely opposite the Rocky Mountains. After Rocky Mount, 95 meets exits in Dorchester, Battleboro, and Whitakers. These are followed by a way station, an exit with NC 481, and an exit with NC 561. This is succeeded by several miles of nothingness, only interrupted by one or two small exits with state routes that don't really lead anywhere important. Thankfully, the monotony is broken by Roanoke Rapids and its exit with US 158. Roanoke Rapids also happens to lie on the Roanoke River.
Wow, really?
Which we cross before meeting an exit with NC 46 outside of Gettysburg, which looks to be part of an unfinished freeway. Finally, we meet a standard diamond exit with NC-48 before crossing into our 5th state, Virginia. Yeesh, I'm only through 4 states and this script is already 9 pages long. Virginia starts us off with an exit for the village of Skippers, which is followed by an exit with US 301 outside of Emporia a few miles later. Also in Emporia is a cloverleaf with US 58. This is followed quickly by 2 exits with US 301 and Virginia 614 in quick succession. Funnily enough, our next exit is with US 301 again, who swaps back over to our west side while 95 takes a turn due north. Next are exits with Girard, Virginia 645, Stony Creek, and Virginia 602. We're in a section of I-95 where not much actually happens, which is rare to see on this road. I'll save you some time and say we meet the towns of Carson, Templeton, and Kingwood before anything interesting actually happens. And I can say with complete confidence that this is where things start to get interesting again.
I'm gonna need to see some citations on that one, buddy.
First things first, we meet an interchange with Virginia Interstate 295, a number choice which seems to be quite popular among this road. This interchange is followed by another, this time a cloverleaf with US 460. By now we're safely in the city of Petersburg, where we meet a conjunction of 3 interchanges connecting us to Business 460, US 301, and the northern end of Interstate 85. Now in downtown Petersburg, we meet another jumble of exits before crossing the Appomattox River, which segues us into Colonial Heights, where we meet an exit with Virginia 144, followed by an exit with the conjunction of Virginia 620 and 746. Hey, do you remember US 1 from like a really long time ago? Well, we're back to paralleling US 1 again, which you'll see will be a thing for quite some time to follow. Right now, we're in between the cities of Petersburg and Richmond, where we meet a sort of stunted cloverleaf with State Route 10. Next up, we meet Virginia 288, a freeway that, in conjunction with I-295, works as a sort of beltway around Richmond, though the two don't actually connect on the south side of the city. At our next interchange, we meet Virginia 150, another freeway around Richmond, as well as Virginia 895, a non-interstate child route of 95 that connects us back to I-295 on the other side of the James River, sort of completing the aforementioned beltway. We meet some smaller exits before crossing the James River into downtown Richmond. Here we meet another non-interstate child of 95, this time being Virginia 195, which is followed by a cramped exit with US 250. Following 250, we meet a familiar sight, this time being the beginning of a concurrency with Interstate 64.
Man, that takes me back to the good old days of 2 years ago.
While on this concurrency, we meet US 301 again before I-64 breaks off west for Staunton in a combined interchange between 6495 and the actual Interstate 195. From here, 95 meets an exit with US 1, which is followed by an exit with US 301. Strangely enough, our next exit is a cloverleaf, though the strange part is that the cloverleaf appears to be just for a normal surface road. This changes quickly, however, as our next interchange is with the northern side of Interstate 295. Well, by this point we have left Richmond, we aren't out of the busyness yet, as we still meet interchanges with Virginia 656, 802, and 54, before finally meeting some trees for the first time in what feels like a while. Following this are interchanges with Virginia 30, 207, and 639. It may seem like we're back to the middle of nowhere, but fret not, for I am yet to find an exit without a McDonald's, at least not since Richmond.
Gotta love that sweet, sweet capitalism!
Next up, we've got an exit in the town of Thornburg, which is followed by an exit with US 17 and 1 in Cosner's Corner. 17 actually becomes concurrent with I-95 here. In Fredericksburg, we meet what appears to be either a partially incomplete or partially decommissioned cloverleaf with Virginia 3. Also here we see the existence of express lanes on 95 for the first time in a long while. Now with our express lanes, we cross the Rappahannock River. Outside of Southern Gateway, we lose concurrency with US 17, which is followed by an exit in Stafford a few miles later. Not long after, we meet a cloverleaf for nothing in particular in Ukiah Harbor. Past this, we meet an exit for Quantico, which is followed by an exit for Triangle. Outside of Southbridge, we meet an interchange for Virginia 234, which is followed by a series of exits for Dale Boulevard, Virginia 642, and Prince William Parkway. We also meet an interchange for Virginia 123 before crossing the Occoquan River. Right after this, we meet a convoluted interchange with US 1, and this is followed by an exit for Lorton, which is followed by a cloverleaf for Virginia 286, which is followed by a series of exits for Virginia 289, Virginia 644, and finally, an absolute monster of an interchange with 395 and Interstate 495 in Springfield.
Oh!
From this interchange, I-95 turns west to become concurrent with its own child route, 495, as the two begin to encircle Washington, D.C. This involves meeting Virginia 611 and US 1 in Alexandria before crossing into Washington for a whopping 300 feet. Yeah, we don't stay in Washington for more than 5 seconds before crossing into Maryland. We enter Maryland immediately by crossing the Potomac River before meeting Interstate 295 on the other side. This is followed immediately by Maryland 210 and Maryland 414 in Oxon Hill, which is also followed by Maryland 5 outside of Camp Springs. We also meet Route 337 in Morningside, which is followed by a cloverleaf with Maryland 4. This is succeeded by a sizable diamond exit with White House Road, which, funnily enough, does not connect to the nearby White House.
We've been lied to!
Next, we find exits with Maryland routes 214, 202, and 704, and then we meet a hybrid interchange with US 50. We meet a few more exits, including those for the Baltimore-Washington Parkway and US 1, before meeting the interchange where I-95 breaks off from 495 to go north. Judging by the fact that the south side of this interchange leads to a park and ride, much as the same as I-70 does, I'm going to guess that 95 was initially meant to go deeper into Washington, D.C. at some point. With 95 back on its own road, we meet the stretch of 95 between Washington and Baltimore, wherein we meet exits for Maryland 212, Maryland 200, Maryland 198, Maryland 216, and Maryland 32, a freeway that connects you to I-70 in the east and I-97 in the west. We also meet Maryland 175 and 100. This is followed by two back-to-back interchanges, first with I-895 and then I-195, which is then followed by I-695, a beltway around Baltimore. It is also the fastest way to access I-70 from here, which we never actually meet head-on.
Aww.
We also meet Maryland 295, a non-interstate child route of 95, which is probably not interstate designated due to the fact that there's already an I-295 in Maryland. In fact, Maryland has child routes for 95 ending in every number except for I-995.
They're just messing with me at this point, aren't they?
We then meet Maryland Route 2 in what is as close to downtown Baltimore as we actually get before entering a tunnel. The Fort McHenry Tunnel, in fact, which 95 utilizes to submerge under the Patapsco River. We cross paths with, but don't exit with, Interstate 895 before meeting an exit with Maryland 150, which is followed by an interchange with our longtime friend US Route 40. And after this, we meet back up with Interstate 895, in which 95 also generates toll lanes again. Following this is our second interchange with I-695, which in itself was followed up by an interchange with Maryland Route 43. The toll lanes end just south of Clayton,
Woohoo!
though it appears that Maryland is in the process of constructing more.
Aww.
Also in Clayton, we meet an exit for Maryland Route 152, and we meet a half cloverleaf with Maryland 24 outside of Emerton a few miles later. Next up, we meet exits for the towns of Belcamp, Aberdeen, and Havre de Grace before crossing the mouth of the Susquehanna River into Perryville. Finally, we meet exits in Bayview and Elkton before crossing into our seventh state, Delaware. The interesting thing about I-95 in Delaware is that 95 is the only two-digit interstate in the entire state. I know that Delaware isn't the biggest state, but dang, I didn't know they got gypped that bad. Thankfully, or unthankfully for the drivers of 95, Delaware tolls 95 throughout the western half of the state as part of the Delaware Turnpike. We start off Delaware with an interchange for Delaware 896, which is followed by a toll plaza, so you better get your wallets ready. Past the toll plaza, we meet exits for Delaware 273, Delaware 7, and US 202 South, which is followed by the big I-295 and 495 interchange. Based on just eyeballing alone, I'm willing to bet that this is the largest interchange in the whole state. From here, 95 crosses the Christina River and continues into downtown Wilmington, where it meets several cramped exits but nothing of notoriety until the exit for US 202 North. In Carcroft, we meet an exit for Delaware 3, which is followed by the other exit for I-495, which so happens to lie on the border to our next state. Pennsylvania doesn't have any interesting exits until US 322, which is concurrent with I-95 for a whopping half mile. That being said, it doesn't take too long for us to meet another interstate, this time Interstate 476, which acts as part of a beltway around Philadelphia. Past this, we snake our way around to the Philadelphia International Airport, where 95 puts one set of lanes on top of the other, a practice I've only ever seen on I-64 in downtown St. Louis. Next up, 95 turns due north to meet an interchange with I-76, which either takes you to Harrisburg or New Jersey, which is about a mile away at this point. Now we're in downtown Philadelphia, where we meet 2 points of interest. First, we meet I-676, a freeway through downtown. Secondly, somewhere in this mess of cramped freeways next to it, we meet the section of I-95 that collapsed in the summer of 2023. Not sure where it's at, though. Also in this area are exits for Route 90, followed by New Jersey Route 73. As we leave Philadelphia, we also meet interchanges with Pennsylvania 633 and 413, which connect you back to US 13 should you choose to exit. After this, 95 meets a two-way interchange with I-276 and I-295, which continues north from here. 95, however, turns east to exit with US 13 and cross the Delaware River into New Jersey.
New Jersey?
We cross into NJ, immediately beginning on a toll road, this time the New Jersey Turnpike, though we haven't junctioned the turnpike proper yet. The first exit we meet is for US 130, and then we merge onto the actual New Jersey Turnpike, heading straight northeast for New York City. The next exit is for Bordentown, which is followed by the Woodrow Wilson and Richard Stockton service areas, which are really interesting to me because we don't have anything like this in the Midwest, aside from your standard fare rest areas, of course. Next, we meet an exit with I-195, which takes you out to Trenton, though if you really wanted to go to Trenton, you probably would have just stayed on 295 in Pennsylvania. Past this, we meet the Hightstown bypass, which is followed by Forest Gate Drive, which, by the looks of it, might have been planned to be something of a freeway at some point. In New Brunswick, we meet NJ18 before crossing the Raritan River.
Say that 5 times fast.
This segues us into our next interchange where we meet New Jersey 440, but more importantly, Interstate 287. Next up, we meet a mess of an interchange that hooks us up to Route 9 and the Garden State Parkway, which is followed by the Thomas Edison and Grover Cleveland service areas. This is followed by an exit for an industrial complex right next to the Rahway River, which we then proceed to cross. Succeeding this is an absolute monster interchange with I-278, which takes you to Brooklyn. Yes, that Brooklyn.
The prophecy!
After 278, we meet another exit, this time for New Jersey 81, which takes you directly to the Newark Liberty International Airport. Oh yeah, did I mention we're in Newark? Further into Newark, we meet arguably one of the most important interchanges in the system at the crossroads of I-95 and I-78, which is the fastest way to access Manhattan from here. Next, 95 meets an exit for Raymond Boulevard, which is followed by the Point-No-Point Bridge across the Passaic River. At this point, I-95 does something I've never seen another interstate do before. It splits. And I don't mean like I-35 in Minneapolis where we see 35E and 35W. I mean 95 splits, like right down the middle. The carriageways literally split from each other, so that we're left with what is called the Eastern Spur and the Western Spur. Confused?
Good, because we're just getting started.
Before the two spurs manage to get that far from each other, we squeeze in an interchange with Interstate 280. That's right, T-Nex Fast's approaching. From here, the Eastern Spur splits off to go east, where it crosses the Hackensack River and meets another industrial complex. Past this, both spurs meet New Jersey 3 and New Jersey 495, which is a direct beeline to the Lincoln Tunnel. The Western Spur also meets the Meadowlands Sports Complex before joining back up with the Eastern Spur in the Vince Lombardi service area. Next, they meet US 46 in Ridgefield Park, before finally meeting the western end of the almighty Interstate 80 in Teaneck. From here, 95 curves its way through Teaneck, meeting DeGraw Avenue and a second exit for US Route 46. Finally, I-95 finds itself on what is very likely the most important bridge in the interstate system, the George Washington Bridge, which is carrying I-95 from New Jersey into Upper Manhattan, New York City. In a strange change of pace, I-95 is actually going more southward than northward for the next few miles. Immediately as we enter New York, we meet an interchange for Interstate 87, which is followed by several smaller exits, such as those for Jerome Avenue and Webster Avenue. As we enter Central Bronx, we also meet New York 895, which is followed closely by the Bronx River Parkway. A few miles later, we meet a 6-way interchange with Interstates 278, 678, and 295. Shortly after, we also meet an interchange with Interstate 695, which just looks like a shortcut from 95 to 295 from what I can see. By this point, 95 has turned back to facing due north again, meeting the Bronx and Pelham Parkway, as well as the Hutchinson River Parkway. The next big route that we hit is US 1 outside of New Rochelle. We also have an exit with Mamaroneck Avenue in, well, as I'm sure you guessed, Mamaroneck. Next up is an exit with Playland Parkway, which is succeeded by an exit with US 1 and Interstate 287, which honestly I completely forgot we ever met. And that's really it for New York. As populated as it is, 95 doesn't travel through anything in the state north of New York City, and we cross into Connecticut on the unassuming Byram River Bridge. I-95 in Connecticut almost entirely parallels the Long Island Sound, so I've got good news for those of you who like beachside towns. Starting with Greenwich, we meet 3 or so exits with some smaller roads, but don't meet any state or national routes until an exit with US 1 a few miles later. This is followed by the city of Stamford, where 95 meets US 1 again, except for this time the two roads actually cross paths. This is until Darien, where US 1 crosses us again, as well as an exit for State Route 136. This is followed by a service area, which is followed by, oh, what do you know, another exit with US 1. This is followed by another exit with US 1. But then we meet US Route 7 in Norwalk. Past 7, we meet exits in the cities of Norwalk and Westport, which is succeeded by Fairfield, where we meet a whopping 3 exits for US 1. I swear these two can't get enough of each other. In downtown Bridgeport, 95 meets a trumpet interchange with State Route 8, which is followed by the...
I'm not even going to try to pronounce that one.
Unsurprisingly, we meet US 1 again in Stratford, which is followed immediately after by the Housatonic River. After this, we meet US 1 for the umpteenth time, and then have an exit with what is probably my favorite road name I've ever seen, and that being Subway. In Milford, we meet the creatively named Milford Parkway, and then meet US 1 again, though this time in a cloverleaf interchange instead of a standard diamond. About 6 or so smaller exits later, we're now in downtown New Haven, where we meet a mess of an interchange with our only other two-digit interstate in Connecticut, that being I-91. From here, 95 curves southeast across the Q Bridge, before exiting with US 1 twice in the same mile, which is followed again by US 1 as well as the Branford Service Plaza not long after. In Branford, we meet two exits, one for Cedar Street and another for US 1, though I feel this interchange is unnecessarily large. It's not the only time that an oddity like that happens, as the same thing happens again in Guilford. Next up, we have exits with State Routes 79, 450, 81, 145, 153, and 154, which narrowly misses US 1. Then we meet Connecticut Route 9 in Old Saybrook right before crossing the Connecticut River into Old Lyme.
Thank God there's no inn.
In East Lyme, we not only meet US 1 again, but we also meet the southern end of I-395, which spurs north to Worcester. And before anybody tries to correct my pronunciation on that, I looked it up, and I don't really care if I'm wrong. This is followed by several small interchanges in New London, where we begin a short concurrency with US 1 and cross the Thames River, not to be confused with the River Thames, which flows through London, England. Hey, wait a second. Finally, we exit in the small towns of Mystic and North Stonington before crossing into our next and smallest state, Rhode Island, which, gonna be honest, I completely forgot about. Question for you Rhode Islanders out there. Do y'all get sick of being reminded that you're the smallest state in the nation, or are you just numb to it? The first thing we meet in Rhode Island is an interchange for State Route 3 outside of Hopkinton, which is followed by an exit for Woodville-Alton Road. In Richmond, we meet an exit with State Route 138, which is then succeeded by a cloverleaf with the otherwise unassuming State Route 102. State Route 3 makes a return for a brief exit before we meet two smaller exits south of Coventry and an exit with State Route 2 that blends into a separate exit with State 4. We also meet an exit for Route 117 in Apponaug. We then meet an interchange that combines both Interstate 295 and State Route 113 together. Following all this is a trumpet interchange that connects 95 back to the Rhode Island TF Green Airport, with an interchange for State Route 37 occurring not long after. In Auburn, we meet State Route 10 and then fly over US 1, with only one exit ramp connecting southbound 95 back to 1. In downtown Providence, I-195 spurs west for Massachusetts, and 95 continues north to meet exits with US 6 and State Route 146 before also crossing into MA. To no one's surprise, US 1 is the first route we meet in Massachusetts. We also meet US 1A as well as State Route 123 in Attleboro. North of Attleboro, we meet the other end of Interstate 295, which, if I had to guess, was probably planned to go further at one point, judging by the path that trails off for a few hundred feet. A few miles up the road, we also meet another one of 95's child routes, this time the absolutely massive I-495. Next up, we meet exits in the cities of Foxborough, Norwood, and Canton. Up next on the exit block is Interstate 93, which continues northwest for Quincy and eventually Boston. Here we see yet another Baltimore situation where an interstate was once planned to go further into a big city, but just never quite made it there. Instead, 95 opts to bypass Boston. In Dedham, 95 meets US 1, which joins us on our journey around the Big B. It's at this point that our carriageways actually get pretty far from each other, so much so that a sheriff's office happens to be built smack dab in the middle of the highway. Wow. Needham gives us an interchange with State Route 9, which is followed by one hell of a complex interchange with the other big 9X interstate, being Interstate 90. That's right, the two biggest interchanges in the system meet, and this is the interchange that they gave us.
I feel like a turbine would have been simpler.
Up the road we meet US 20 in Waltham, which is followed by a cloverleaf with State Route 2 in Lexington. Also in Lexington is an interchange with State Route 4 and what looks to be another canceled freeway, this time in the form of US 3. We also meet State Route 3A not long after in Burlington. Remember I-93? Well, it's back, this time in full cloverleaf form. From here, 95 meets several small exits around the city of Wakefield before meeting an interchange with the Yankee Division Highway, though some of you may know it as Massachusetts State Route 128. From 128, I-95 continues north to meet exits in Peabody, Topsfield, and Georgetown. In Newburyport, we meet an exit for State Route 113, which is followed by the Merrimack River and State Route 110 after it. Remember I-495 from the beginning of Massachusetts? Well, it's back as well, and just in time because not long after, I-95 crosses the border into New Hampshire. I take back anything bad I ever said about Rhode Island because New Hampshire takes the cake for being the state with the least I-95 mileage. That's right, we're only in NH for a staggering 16.1 miles, and yet somehow there still manages to be a mile-long Wikipedia article about 95 in this state. Our first exit in NH is with State Route 107 in Seabrook, which is followed by State Route 101 outside of Hampton. In Portsmouth, 95 meets an exit for State Route 33 as well as an interchange for US 4, which is your best bet for accessing the Portsmouth International Airport. Finally, we're here already, 95's last exit, in New Hampshire, is a standard diamond interchange with Market Street in downtown Portsmouth, before crossing the Piscataqua River into our, at long last, final state, Maine.
By this point, the script for this video is 20 pages long, so hopefully Maine doesn't carry too much I-95 miles. Dang it!
The first notable exit in Maine is a somewhat complicated one with US 1, which is followed by exits in the small towns of York, Wells, and Kennebunk, which gets its own service plaza. In Biddeford, we meet an interchange for State Route 111 and US 1 before crossing the Saco River and meeting Interstate 195 in, well, you might have guessed, Saco. 95 meets the Haggis Parkway in Scarborough, which is then succeeded by our final Interstate 295, this time spurring off into Portland. Next, we meet the Portland International Airport in what is as close to downtown Portland as we get on Mainline 95. We have two trumpet interchanges in Westbrook, which is followed by the Falmouth Spur, which connects 95 back to I-295. This is a good thing, given that I-95 won't actually be meeting the north end of 295 for a long while. As I-95 continues north into the wilderness of Maine, it meets exits for the towns of Gray and Danville, where we meet US 202. From here, 95 curves its way around Lewiston, which is then followed by an exit for Route 9 outside of Sabattis. Nearing Augusta, we link back up with Interstate 295 for the last time, and then we enter Augusta, where we have three exits. One for US 202, one for State Route 27, and one for State Route 3. Down the road, there's also a way station and exit in the village of Sydney. We next meet two exits for Waterville, though we never go directly through it, which is followed by two exits for Fairfield, one of which being US 201. Right after this, we also meet the Kennebec River. Next, we meet exits in the towns of Clinton, Pittsfield, and Newport. Around Newport, I-95 curves to turn east, and it will remain that way for a while. We meet three smaller exits with no discernible towns before meeting our last interstate on this long journey, which is I-395, which spurs off into downtown Bangor. In Bangor, we meet exits with US 2, State Route 222, State Route 15B, and two smaller in-town roads. We also meet Alt US 2 up the road, which takes you to the University of Maine. You know we're nearing the end if we've hit US 2. It's as low as the numbering gets, minus US 1, which we haven't met in a long while by this point. Following this, we meet an exit for State Route 43 and half of an exit for State Route 16. Down the road, or perhaps I should say up the road, we meet an exit for State Route 155 in the town of Holand. After this, there are exits in the towns of Lincoln, Medway, and Benedicta. Miles later, we meet State Route 158 in Sherman. We then meet State Route 159 in Island Falls. At this point, I-95 is mostly done going north, as it turns to the east, crossing over US 2 in the process. After this, there's an exit for Oakfield and Smyrna Falls. Then we meet US 2 again, though this time we actually exit with it. Finally, after 1,900 miles, things end just as they begin, with an exit for US Route 1 in Holton, Maine, followed by our final exit with the eastern terminus of US Route 2. And with that, Interstate 95 ends at the Canadian border, turning into New Brunswick Route 95 and continuing east to Woodstock in New Brunswick. If I'm being honest, it probably would have made more sense to save this video for the series finale, but I'm glad that I went ahead and did it now. I-95 is an incredibly important, albeit long route, so it carries a lot of people, and from a YouTube perspective, a lot of potential viewers. Either way though, I'm glad that I went ahead and did 95 now versus in the future. Especially if, heaven forbid, something happens and I'm unable to continue this channel, I'll at least have a 95 video still up. It's been a long trip, totaling over 1,900 miles, 15 states, and 22 pages of script. For reference, the I-70 video was only 9 pages. It was a lot of fun spending weeks working on this video though. So with all of that, I can finally say thanks for watching, and I'll see you all later this year with the third season of Interstates, where we'll start by talking about Interstate 19. Finally, at long last, we've reached the end. We've traveled all the way from Miami to Holton. 22 pages of script, oh boy, what a trip. Now I know why they say it's such a big highway. 15 states and also more cities than I can count. New York traffic makes me want to scream and shout. My eyes are beholding a beauty of buildings as I drive the freeway. You're gonna hear me say 95 the biggest and the best. It carries more commuters than all of the rest. You'll find yourself on this road, it's no humble abode. It's 95, the biggest and the best. It puts the other interstates to shame. We'll say your roads are bad, well 95's to blame. It eats all the budget cause the traffic will crush it. If the DOT stop, there will be thousands of potholes. The biggest, the widest, and the best. Compare them all, there's clearly no contest. Going north and south along the Atlantic, it's a really long drive and the traffic is frantic. 95, the biggest and the best. It's the East Coast Highway, not the West. I've just got one question, it racks my brain so I've traveled the best. Now where do I go?
Yep, he's still not answering. Have you tried the door? Do I look stupid? Well, did you? He's home and he's not expecting anyone. Obviously, it's locked. Are you sure? Well, what idiot would leave his door unlocked? Me! I'm that idiot! Well, just because you're stupid doesn't mean he is.
You know, I'm not even sure he's home.
Jerry, it's
What?
drizzling outside and thundering. Plus, it's 90 degrees.
Yeah.
He's home.
Crap, I-95 killed him.
Hold on one second. Let me try something.
My 72 senses are going off.
He's alive.
Look, man, I know long videos are hard, but you've been in your room for a week. You gotta go outside.
The outside is scary, and I'm pretty sure they make meth.
Well, at least do something productive. I mean, living a sedentary life in here? What's the point?
I've covered the biggest interstate in the system. Where do I go from here? I mean, what's left to do?
Well, have you tried covering the longest? I mean, what about I-90?
Hey, size doesn't matter!
Well, I mean, you could try talking about highways from other countries. I mean, sprechen Sie Deutsch?
Yes, because our audience of Americans who watch for interstate content are gonna love to hear about Bundesautobahn 2.
Well, anything's better than being cooped up in your room all day.
Let's try something. How's it feel being here in person?
The same as it did 30 minutes ago.
Maybe we should take him to Illinois.
Forget it, I can't afford the gas.
Well, I appreciate the effort, you guys, but like, I don't think anything's gonna get me out of the slump. I'm stuck creatively, you know?
Wait, I've got an idea.
Not one of those things. Who wants to talk about I-72?